Hi everybody, this is Matt Kilbasa speaking with week number 6. We're going to be looking at the cardiovascular system and structures and function of the actual sheep's heart. We have a great dissection today for you. We're looking at the anterior and the posterior side of the heart. We're looking at some of the structures and external and internal function or structures, looking at some of the flow and some of the background. So just starting with the background, the cardiovascular system, the heart itself, is a great battery source for the rest of the body and how it sustains life. This is our life pack here, and God really made a great design for our hearts to function properly. The heart itself is composed of many blood vessels, arteries, capillaries, and veins that transport blood throughout the body, as mentioned just before. This is going to be a circulatory system, so we're going to look at some of the deoxygenated blood into the oxygenated side of the heart, oxygenated blood itself. So coming from the anatomical terms, we're going to have the apex of the heart, the base of the heart. The right side of the heart is going to be deoxygenated blood. You have your right atrium, your right ventricle, your left atrium, and your left ventricle. This is going to be the oxygenated blood, the left side. Okay, looking at the flow of the heart, we're looking at the inferior and superior vena cava. The blood flows into the right atrium, through the tricuspid valve, to the right atrium, back up into the pulmonary trunk, into the pulmonary arteries, the pulmonary arteries, which goes into left and right pulmonary arteries. This again gets oxygenated through the lungs, comes back into the pulmonary veins, getting into the left atrium, followed by the bicuspid valve into the left atrium. The left atrium is really important because it's going to be the main pump to go to the rest of the body. So it has to have all this pressure and all this pumping action to go to the rest of the body. The blood flows back up into the aorta, into the aortic arch, and into the rest of the body. So that's right now some of the background information, some of the flow of the blood, and structure. So anyway, next is going to be part 2. Hang tight. All right, here we have part 2. We're looking at the external anatomy of the heart itself, and kind of going into small detail here. The epicardium, or the visceral pericardium, is the housing part of the heart itself. It's the outermost layer. This is again what houses the heart itself. Next, we'll move into the apex of the heart here, the base of the heart here, the left and right atrium. Here's the right atrium. Here's the left atrium. The right atrium holds or sustains deoxygenated blood. The right ventricle deoxygenated blood. The left atrium is oxygenated, and the left ventricle is oxygenated blood. Okay. Next, we'll move into the right and left auricles. The right auricle is this little cone-shaped muscle here. It's right on top of the right atrium, and it collects primarily of the deoxygenated blood. This is also called the right atrial appendage. On the converse, this is the left atrial appendage, or the left auricle on this side. This is what's going to be also the small muscular pouch, if you will, at the upper left-hand corner of the atrium. Then this collects the oxygenated blood from the lungs, and it moves to and through the atrium to the ventricle, the left ventricle. Okay, moving on to the interventricular sulcus. The interventricular sulcus is going to be located right here. This is going to be at the anterior side. The anterior interventricular sulcus is going to be primarily situated on the sternocostal surface of the heart, and is close to the left margin. So this is right here is the left margin here on the heart. Okay, all right. On the posterior side is going to be the interventricular sulcus posterior, or posterior interventricular sulcus. That's going to be right along here, okay? That's also important. Why? Because it actually sits on the diaphragmatic surfaces, or surface of the heart, and it's going to be on the right margin. So on the right margin here is the left, this is the right. Okay, this kind of yourself a little orientation on that. This actually feeds the great cardiac vein. The great cardiac vein actually goes along the side here, and actually can go around and kind of situate itself right here along the side of the heart. Okay, but that's the great cardiac vein. It kind of runs along here. It just, actually goes down a little bit on the branches. But anyway, this is going to be your coronary sinus that overlaps the sulcus itself. Okay, moving on to the aorta, the pulmonary trunk. The pulmonary trunk is going to be more the part where the blood from the right ventricle pushes itself into the pulmonary trunk, into the pulmonary arteries. The pulmonary trunk is going to be that housing factor for the pulmonary arteries. The pulmonary arteries are deoxygenated blood. It gets shot over and into the lungs, gets oxygenated, comes back into the pulmonary veins, and goes into the left atrium, and it eventually goes again into the left ventricle, which pushes out to the body. Okay. And then going to the aorta. The aorta has a couple different parts to it, actually. We'll look at it from the posterior side more so. But here inside is going to be your aortic arch, and you're going to have your three branches. You're going to have your brachiocephalic artery, which is going to be on right here. Brachiocephalic artery, right there. Where is it? Right here. Brachiocephalic artery. Okay. Your left common carotid, or your aorta, right there. Subclavian, right there. Okay, very good. And with the aorta itself, there's 6 different parts to the aorta because it's probably the largest artery in the body. First, we'll have the aortic root. The aortic root goes into basically the ascending and descending part of the artery itself. It's part of the left and right coronary arteries. The aortic root actually supplies the heart and oxygenates the blood. So we got to remember that. It's really, really important. Next, we'll move into the ascending aorta. We remember that the ascending aorta comes back up for the most anterior toward the front of the body. And so, therefore, it's sometimes people who have chest pain, for instance, will experience that the ascending aorta, or AKA coronary artery disease. Okay, moving on with the next one, we have the aortic arch. The aortic arch is going to be actually right here. These again feed into right there, if you can see it. Whoops. Aortic arch is right there. All right. This aortic arch is actually on the transverse side of the aorta. It goes along, again, the transverse plane. And has typically, again, 3 branches as described earlier. The brachiocephalic, the left common carotid, and the left subclavian. So coming from the anterior side, we're going to have we're going to have this little pocket here is going to be your brachiocephalic artery, your aorta, and your left subclavian artery right there, left subclavian. Okay, and this is really important with through the aortic arch. All right, this is part 3, and we're looking at the internal structures of the heart here. To kind of get yourselves a little oriented, this is going to be the right side of the heart and the left side of the heart. Here we have the right atrium, the right ventricle, the interventricular septum, the left atrium, the left ventricle, and the apex of the heart here, the base of the heart here. Okay, next we'll move into the pictonate. The pictonate's going to be at the top here. I kind of did already a cross section of it, and it's going to be right at this location here on the right ventricle. Next we'll move into the right atrium itself here, capturing the deoxygenated blood, followed by the tricuspid valve, which is going to be right here. I almost cut it pretty well actually, but the tricuspid valve is right there. This feeds into the, again, deoxygenated blood into the right ventricle. In the right ventricle, we're going to move into the atrioventricular septum. Boom. Next, we'll move into the, again, left atria, left ventricle. Okay, here we have the pulmonary semilunar valves, or semilunar valves is going to be at the top, right there. We'll be right through there. Okay. Next, we'll move into the epicardium. The epicardium is that outermost layer of the heart itself. Okay. Well, actually, it's probably a better view here. The epicardium is outside, the myocardium and the endocardium, the most inner part of the muscle itself, the cardiac muscle. Okay, next we'll move into the papillary muscles. This is the papillary muscle here. The trabeculae carnae, it's going to be actually right in between there, right and underneath. That's trabeculae carnae. Okay, the papillary muscle again. The choroidae tendineae is going to be right here. And the bicuspid valve right here. And the back up to the left atrium.